Right, kia ora everyone. This is John Cook from Wakanine. Welcome to From the Edge, what's next for hospitality. We're a couple of minutes past the hour, so we're going to get going. And like to introduce David Trubridge and our special guest, Danu Kennedy. So I will get out of the way and we will get Danu and David. There we go. David in his very snappy red V-neck coming in live and direct from New Zealand, and Danu, our new friend, Kiwi friend, designer, great designer, hospitality designer based in Brooklyn. So without further ado, David, I will turn it over to you. One comment, we've got quite a few questions to answer for the Q&A session, and we've also tailored the discussion today based on your input, so thank you for that. We'll do about 30 minutes plus or minus of discussion with Danu and David, and then 10 to 15 minutes to wrap it up with Q&A. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please submit it through the Q&A feature of Zoom. So with that, kia ora, thank you, and David, over to you.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, John, and hi, Danu. Thank you very much for joining us today from New York.
Hi, David. Thanks for joining, everybody. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
It's hot summer. I heard you were sweltering there when we last talked, and it's midwinter here, and as you can see, I'm in a jumper and it's cold. So interesting the sort of contrast we're having.
Totally. Yeah, it's very hot and humid over here for sure. So probably polar opposites at this point.
But you're originally a Kiwi, so you know about that.
I am, exactly. I've been over here for about 9 years now, but always coming home to visit. So yes, for sure.
So we're talking about hospitality, which is the area which you work in. And hospitality is about people, isn't it? It's about people getting together and sharing and being in spaces and all the sort of social interaction which humans are all about. And suddenly now we've got COVID and we can't do that. So how does hospitality and COVID kind of work together? I mean, how are you coping with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been tough. There's been a lot of, a lot of restaurants, a lot of bars, a lot of hotels actually, really being, completely confronted by this experience, and obviously across the world having to shut down. I mean, I think for us at the moment where, the conversation is around what people will feel comfortable, in this sort of new world. How do people want to socialize? What health parameters do we have to maintain in order for them to do that safely? But, I do think that socialization, humans are social creatures at their core, and, hospitality spaces, especially in cities like New York, are really some of the only places that you can really get together. Our apartments are so small, they're very small spaces. So a lot of our socializing happens in hotels, whether it be the bars, restaurants, lobbies, etc. So I definitely don't think that will go away. I think that has already started to return here in New York. But we are going to have to look at, furniture layouts, floor plans, and essentially the groupings that these spaces facilitate. We're going to have to look at how those cope with our new parameters.
I mean, one sort of taking that theme a bit further, one sort of instance of travel is the kind of say the check-in, for example. Or in a restaurant, it's the people you meet. It's the happy face, the guy who you remember who checked you in at the hotel because he welcomed you and he said some nice things about you and New York, and the waiter who gave you a nice smile. Those human interactions are so much part of who we are and the beauty of being in those places. So what's going to happen? We're going to have machines to check in and robots to deliver our stuff in the cafe?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a funny point because I actually feel like prior to COVID, technology has been sort of taking over slowly for a while now. And, a lot of hotels and properties over here, you've actually started to see this, exactly as you're saying, self-check-in happening, and that human interaction goes away at the point of check-in. But I think that it's being replaced by there actually being a bit of a value system shift in where you get that interaction. So I think people are going to start doing self-check-in. They're going to rely on technology for that. But what you'll see in hospitality spaces is that that sort of interaction is then something that you get in the restaurant or the bar or in another form. And something I like about that is that it actually becomes less formal. It becomes a little bit more natural, because you can sit at the bar and say, look, I've just arrived from overseas, tell me about the neighborhood, and you're kind of having a little bit more of a free-flowing interaction than the interaction you might have with someone at the check-in experience.
Yeah, I like that, because I always feel slightly uncomfortable at the sort of rather obsequious nature of some of the big hotels and the check-in process.
Yeah.
And if it's more casual and relaxed, more human, I'd go with that. I think that's great.
Yeah. And I think it's a nice way as well for you to enter a space, because you can then kind of find your own way a little bit before you're confronted with a very formal check-in process.
And another issue that's happening is change of use of streets. I gather that restaurants are moving out onto the streets and taking over streets. And for me, that is the most wonderful thing to hear. I'm not a city person, and I really struggle with the noise and the stink of the pollution of streets. And I can't believe it when I see people sitting in a street cafe with a diesel truck right there next to them, and this engine still going, and the fumes pouring out over them. So if we can clear the streets of traffic and have all this sort of pedestrian area for bars and restaurants, so you can spread people out, that's great. I love that. Isn't that a bonus?
It's wonderful. New York actually is a really easy city to get around on foot. And I think that having this sort of, I guess, shift of people saying, hey, the human walk around is now king. The traffic is sort of going to the second tier, and it's amazing. I love it. It's exactly as you're saying. I mean, I don't think anyone really loves that experience of fumes and traffic and everything while they're trying to socialize. And the other thing that it's been hugely impactful on is obviously businesses, because so many bars, restaurants had to close down because no one is allowed to go into interior space. And so the city has given back in that way, where they've said, okay, fine, cars, you go away, and people can occupy the streets. And you do get a really nice sense of community through that too, because you actually are seeing each other out in your daily lives again, which is amazing after being quarantined for so long.
Yeah. Obviously the next question is what happens in winter. I mean, I love the outdoors, and I love to be out in the weather, but not so much in a New York winter. So then what happens? Do we have to design new kind of internally heated pods for people to sit on the street? Is that the next stage?
Yeah, well, some interesting examples again that I had seen dealing with this problem prior to COVID were particularly hotels that had a substantial exterior footprint, that obviously in summer they had their gardens and what have you, but in winter what they'd done already, because obviously square footage over here is it's so profitable. So the way that they dealt with the seasonal change already was actually, as you're saying, having basically temporary structures. So there's a hotel here, the Hoxton Hotel, that in summer it's got a beautiful courtyard, and in winter they actually do have temporary domes that are really interestingly designed. They're basically designated for about, I think, 6 to 10 people. So that's pro-COVID anyway, that sort of group of people. And other examples is there's a really funky sort of restaurant here called Roberta's Pizza, and they had always had a canvas tenting structure with an outdoor fireplace that they just put up in winter too. So I do think that there's ways that we can still capitalize on that outdoor space if we are looking at this sort of ban from interior environments, more long term. But I think we're going to see some real, ingenuity and some creative responses to that.
Great opportunity for us designers. I love the idea of the outdoor fireplace, sitting around a fire. It's great.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, exactly.
When we were talking earlier last week, you talked about a hotel you stayed upstate in New York, Marriott Hotel, which had slightly changed the way in which it sort of allowed you to enter in your rooms. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so one thing that I noticed about that property, it's a beautiful beachfront property in Montauk. It's boutique, it's, all natural wood. It's designed so that essentially all of the guest rooms are directly open to the exterior and you can enter them from the sand dunes. And I just, their public spaces as well were very exposed to the outdoors and they were reachable, without going inside. So one thing that struck me about that was that this sort of low-lying and exposed entry to the outdoors from your guest rooms was basically the most attractive, hospitality experience in a COVID time that I could think of, because you didn't have to walk through a lobby, you didn't have to come into contact with any strangers if you didn't want to, and you were constantly getting fresh air. So I think that those are some things that make people feel safe and secure and okay to be staying outside of their homes right now. And the way that this property was set up, it was sort of almost feeling like I guess a bit of a very luxury and beautifully designed but motel structure where you're kind of much more independent within a footprint of a hospitality space. So, I thought they'd done that really well.
But how does that relate to sort of bigger style, multi-floor hotels? Is it possible to do that, or is there always going to be a problem there?
I think that it's going to depend on a lot of, developers and their attitudes towards this. Sometimes it's probably going to take a little longer, I think, to see how quickly the people with the money are going to respond and allow people to push the boundaries with that. But I personally think it would be crazy not to. I think that our reliance on air conditioning, elevators, these interior cores that, basically shut nature out, has really been challenged through COVID. And I think that responding to that by bringing a connection back to the outdoors, nature, fresh air, is what we have to do. I think we really need to protect each other by allowing ourselves to exist within healthy environments.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to see that shift. And so that's us connecting to nature outdoors. One of the things that we try to do with our designs and our work is to do the opposite as well, is to bring aspects of nature back inside and recreate some of those feelings to energize and liven and enrich our interior spaces. Do you think this will continue to happen, or will we sort of rather sort of ignore the inside and look more to the outside?
No, I think it will continue to happen. And I think that it's probably going to, exactly as you're saying, this connection and bringing that indoors, I think will happen and more, and there'll be a need for it more. I think people want to feel that when they're in interior spaces. And, as you said before, we can't avoid weather conditions. We can't always be outside. So I do think people will, obviously need to rely on the indoors, and that will continue to happen, even in hotels, even with, bigger properties. But I do think that people will want to see more of a connection to nature through design, exactly as you say that you guys do. I think that's going to be more and more in demand as time goes on.
That's great news for us, and it fits with my philosophy, because I just, I think nature's so important. I think we've tended to think we rule it and we can do without it, and actually it's biting back, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And nature has, been thriving, right? Humans have had to be, locked inside, and it looks like it's been amazing for the environment. So it's really kind of put us on the spot in a good way, I think.
Yeah. Can I ask you about the WELL building standards? We're working with them in the States because we like to sort of fit into anything that improves quality. Is this being incorporated generally, or is it a more specific thing?
I think at the moment, you know, I feel like it's probably going to have quite a, you know, increase after COVID, because I think that people are really going to want to see specific accountability measures put in place for businesses, developments, hotels, restaurants, to uphold their end of the bargain. And I think that, you know, kind of as LEED has done that for projects in terms of, you know, materiality and footprint and all of that, I think the WELL standards are going to be doing that, but maybe more for environment and, you know, like air and all of that. And I have actually seen a lot of COVID response on their website being updated. So I think that that will probably come to the forefront a lot more.
That's great. But at the same time as improving our standards through WELL and other certification systems, we're doing the opposite as well, aren't we? Because we're increasing the amount of sanitizers and antibacterial sprays and all those things which effectively kill off nature and effectively reduce our immunity. So we're actually more susceptible to disease as a result. So it's sort of a contradiction happening there, isn't it? That we're kind of, we love nature, but actually when it comes indoors in certain ways, we kill it.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, it's a real shame because there, you know, I think COVID is such an extreme virus that it's, you know, look, whenever people get confronted with something that is essentially terrifying, you always get fear-based responses. And that often is, you know, over sanitation, over sterilization, you know, everyone kind of wanting to get away and make sure that their hands are clean and all of that stuff. And I mean, I'm definitely a big believer that, you know, immunity and building up your, you know, natural antibodies and, you know, steering away from bleaches and over sanitization in general is much more healthy for you. But I think we're going to kind of need to see a little bit more information come through about COVID before people will relax on that. So I do think that there's probably going to be a huge focus on very clean environments, especially in hospitality spaces where multiple people have been touching surfaces. But I hope that, you know, at some point we're going to get educated around COVID enough in order to put that in its separate category and then be able to kind of deal with the rest of the world's, you know, or nature's germs and what nature has to offer you in a much more rational sense.
But does it mean we're going to have more kind of easily sanitized surfaces? It's going to change the sort of finish?
I think so. And I think a lot of that will come in with certain fabrics, you know, porous materials. I think that people are going to want to feel like they're in a relatively clean environment. But I do think that there's a difference between a, you know, sort of like hospital feeling, if you will, space that's all white and sterile. I think that we can achieve that through using natural materials still, beautiful wood finishes, you know, a minimalist approach, you know, even lighter material palettes. But I think that we're going to probably steer away from, you know, things like shag carpets and a lot of upholstery, and, you know, people are kind of going to want a little bit more hard surface, probably a lot more wood, I think. And those kind of more natural but also easily cleanable, and, you know, you can visually tell if they're dirty or not. I think those kind of materials are going to be king for a while, for sure.
I mean, it's kind of ironic that wood is actually one of the most sterile materials. It's not so easily cleaned as stainless steel, but it's a great clean material. Yeah,
and it's also, I think it really makes people feel comfortable, warm, you know, connected, all of that. So, you know, I think that will stay around as a top material.
And what about air conditioning? Because that's another issue, isn't it? That I mean, it's vastly improved the quality of life in so many buildings, but it's also, I think, a spreader of disease too. It pumps it around the building, and so how are we going to handle that one?
I mean, I personally, I don't like being in air-conditioned spaces. I think it like dries your eyes out. You just don't really get fresh air. It's a hard sell for me, and I actually would like to see the industry move away from a reliance on that in order to make interior spaces work. I mean, there's a whole industry, an architectural philosophy around, ventilating spaces naturally. They're just often a lot smaller than what people want to build. So I think that, I feel like it would actually be great if the world was challenged to build smaller, rely on the natural environment a little bit more, and steer away from so much, AC and aircon. But, again, it's sort of a reliance on developers to kind of come forward and want to pursue some of this.
And it also comes back to design ingenuity, to find ways to create buildings which like the Arabs have done for so many years in the Middle East, of natural ventilation, of using different ways to keep the building warm without actually having to use electricity and power, which is much design.
Exactly, 100%, yeah.
And are you seeing any changes in, I mean, you talk about, obviously we're not going to have so many shag pile carpet, that's good, I'm happy with that. Any other changes in colour or natural finishes, any sort of directions that you see things going in?
I mean, I do think that at the moment we're seeing a lot of the sort of neutral or nude palette, which, is a real reference to nature. I think we're going to see more and more of this kind of tonal range of materials come through. So I think that'll be a design trend, but I do also think it's probably going to be a bit of a longer lasting one, where people are going to want to have a kind of a calm environment. And I think that does also tie in with the idea of wellness, which is something that's really coming through in hospitality space. But also I think across, culture, this idea of wellness, this idea of mental health, and this idea of well-being is championed at the moment in design. And a lot of that is this calm aesthetic, nude palettes, natural materials, and sort of handcrafted approach to design.
And do you think this kind of moment of the COVID virus is kind of watershed in change of design, or are there other things from pre-COVID times that are still going strong afterwards? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of this stuff actually, in some ways, I think COVID will have expedited some trends that were happening before. So I would say that, what we were talking about before in terms of technology, that's one of those. I do think that, prior to COVID, we were seeing this investigation of space from, amenity space to guest room space. And, your guest rooms are getting much smaller, and we're prioritizing larger social spaces. I think that's probably one that's going to change and be flipped on its head. But also, when we're talking about palette and those color tones, I do think that was something we were seeing rising up with this sort of return to a craft-based mentality, and neutral palette, wellness, all of that I do think was pre-COVID as well. It's just that COVID will have really kind of solidified that and expedited it.
So it's interesting that actually we're not being completely changed. Already a lot of those changes were incipient before, and just continue, which is good.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And what about the kind of your clients, your customers, or the market? How do you see that at the moment? Is it shrunk, or is it changing direction? And are the money being spent? Are clients coming to you, or are they waiting till things cut?
Yeah, a bit of both. So we have had, it's been interesting really. We have a great relationship with most of our clients, where we've been able to discuss this openly with them. And, some of them have chosen to put their projects on hold to kind of be able to evaluate what the new climate looks like, and if their plans were still going to be relevant, I guess. But other people have actually just plowed forward, and we've been lucky in terms of a business to keep going and have a lot of work still on the cards. But I think there's definitely been an apprehension around making sure that what is being put out today is going to be relevant tomorrow. And I see and hear a lot of focus on flexibility. So people are really wanting, I think they've always wanted flexible space, but I think that that's increasing a lot because, they want to be able to have a space that, I guess, responds to these smaller groups, but also is able to open up and facilitate, larger groupings if that becomes something that we're able to do again, I think people are obviously thinking about their projects as relatively permanent and long term, so they're kind of just trying to be adaptable right now.
Mm-hmm. So it is a moment of sort of hiatus in a way, that some are kind of hedging their bets and waiting to see how it's going to go before they commit.
Totally, yeah. And, some projects I've actually been, wanting to kind of push people to say, hey, no, like, let's respond to this and see what we can do. But I think exactly as you're saying, most people overall are looking to kind of hedge their bets a bit and make sure that they're doing the right thing before they're spending their dollars, which is fair enough, obviously.
Well, that's the end of the sort of the kind of chat we planned. And we've done about half an hour, so that's pretty good timing. And and what we could do now is answer some of the questions that people have sent in before.
Great.
Before and also during the talk. There was Christopher Ralston, who is our sales rep at Apartment Zero in Washington, DC, is asking, in response to the question of what are you struggling with most, is what are lobbies, community rooms, outdoor and other common areas, other common area spaces going to look like post-COVID? We've sort of covered that, but is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is that I think a lot of existing hotels, so, we're talking about properties that were already open, what we're seeing happening at the moment, and actually this is a Thompson hotel that we designed in Washington, DC, so he may be familiar with that property. But what we're doing at the moment is working with them to essentially just reconfigure the furniture layouts, so interior layouts, to abide by the social distancing guidelines. There's not that much more they can do yet. So, one thing is that a lot of these hotel properties are lucky because they have quite an expanse of space, tall ceilings, large footprints, which does make people feel a little bit more comfortable, I think, being in those interior spaces. But we're reconfiguring things to be, no more than 4 people in a seating group, and everyone maintains the 6 foot, etc. So it's kind of about reconfiguring furniture right now, I think.
Yeah. Nikaya Schneider from Switch Modern Atlanta says, do you think the design and budgets for hospitality will start skewing less towards luxury and more towards practicality?
A good question. I think that they are in some ways probably going to get more intertwined, because I think that there is going to be a lot of enforced practicality with, this post-COVID or during COVID, kind of revisiting of prioritization. But I don't think that luxury will go away. I think that essentially, especially with hospitality spaces, people are, going out, socializing and spending their money, and they're still going to want a certain experience. They're still going to want to see beautiful light fixtures and have a wonderful experience with their, people within their bubble, and sit on wonderfully designed chairs and have a delicious cocktail, etc. So I don't think that luxury will fall aside.
But it is going to, luxury will always be there. The people with money will always be prepared to pay for whatever they can get.
Yes.
But the interesting thing is the other end of the scale are we going to see more time being spent on trying to create better spaces for people which are less luxurious?
Yeah, I hope so. And I do actually think that that's, to your point before, I do think that was happening more before COVID as well than we'd seen. I think the white tablecloth approach is starting to fall to the wayside a lot with the new generations coming up and wanting more of a connection and a certain, I think luxury these days is defined, I think, more by experience than an isolated experience is not what people are looking for, is what I'm trying to say. So I think rather than sitting at your white tablecloth and it's just you and one person, people are much more happy to sit in a grouping around a cocktail table and kind of have a more casual dialogue. So it kind of depends what you think of as luxury, but I think that old school approach to luxury is definitely going to go away more and more.
I don't mind that.
Totally.
Chiara Zanolin, a student from New York School of Interior Design. Hi there, Chiara. What sustainable design practices do you believe work best and should be implemented in the hospitality industry?
That's a good and tricky question. I if I was being completely honest, I don't think that we have a huge amount of very effective sustainable design practices in terms of full building construction. I think that there's a huge reliance on materials that can't be reused, that don't stand the test of time, and that, project budgets are still what drives, most projects to even be constructed. I think that I hope that COVID actually challenges a little bit of that. And, as we talked about before, a connection with nature and a bit more of a focus on materiality comes into play. But, I still think that the building industry and design industry that, I exist within is actually extremely unsustainable, to be honest. So,
I mean, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that bothers me about the industry is the need to constantly redecorate and have a new look, a new decor every so often. And think of all those bars in Europe, in the cities in Europe, in France, in Paris, in Milan. They haven't changed their decor in 30, 40, 50 years, and they're still packed out. They don't need to do that. And that's surely far more sustainable than this, as you say, short-term use materials which wear out very quickly, and they know they're going to wear out quickly, and that's fine because they're going to change it all in a few years. That's very, very unsustainable, and I think we need to start valuing good quality stuff that will last, and not expect it to be changed every few years.
Yeah, and be timeless, exactly as you're saying. And I think that, a fear of mine that we, that COVID will bring is this, even more temporary. People are putting up plastic screens and temporary partitions and all of this. And honestly, even this reliance on face masks and plastic gloves, as much as they're important, I definitely am not saying they're not important, but, is there a sustainable way that we can start, implementing those measures as well, rather than having more disposable plastics, etc.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that the cheapest one is the immediate solution, but it's not always what invariably isn't the best one in the longer term.
No, yeah.
Sam Martin, interior design and architect, asks, how can we maximize the use of timber for indoor and outdoor purposes?
I would say I'm not sure 100% what that question means, but I think that timber's used a lot in indoor and exterior applications. I would say that, just as we talked about, I think that there's a lot of reliance on veneer and cheap woods and applications, and not real proper timber that's been treated for conditions to last a long time. So I would say that that's, got really using proper solid wood, hardwood in the right environments would be a way that we could, maximize its use, if that's what that question meant. But I do think that there's, most exterior and interior hospitality spaces do have a lot of wood already.
I mean, when I compare it to 10, 15 years ago, I see far more wood and solid wood furniture, and I think that's great.
Yeah, totally.
I just worry that I hope there's enough trees to supply the demand.
Well, exactly. Not if we're chucking it out after, 15 years or something, right? That's the thing, is it's if we can design more sustainably, then probably, but yeah.
Natalie Scheutz, interior design and architect. Public spaces and people wanting to be together rather than their rooms. This is what she's struggling with in terms of designing for hospitality, designing public spaces, and the fact that people want to be together rather than, how do you overcome that? We sort of covered that already, I think, haven't we?
Yeah.
Joan Riggs, how do we get the general public to understand design significance to the built environment? Has COVID opened that door?
How do we get the general public to design significance?
How do we get the general public to understand the significance of design in the built environment, the importance of design? Has COVID sort of opened that door a bit?
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's a great point. I hope that that's the case. I mean, I do think living somewhere like New York, there's a huge focus on your aesthetic environment. So I do think people are quite focused on design anyway, but I do think globally this probably has increased that because people are so conscious of their physical environments. And I do think that people are going to probably have a much more focused opinion on where they go. So yeah, I hope that that does raise a bit of awareness to good design and well-designed spaces as opposed to, you know, kind of cheap and fast, I guess. So yeah, I can see that happening.
John makes the point that poorly designed space can endanger your health. So
Yeah.
in a sense, good design is really important, isn't it?
100%, yeah. And I actually think that, you know, COVID's also raised this point of mental health and how people are doing without each other, without this kind of social interaction. And I think that spatial design in your interior environment definitely has an effect on that. So, you know, if we're in poorly designed spaces, you know, catching a virus is one thing, but actually just, you know, feeling depressed or down or, you know, run out of energy and all of that is a big factor as well.
Yeah, and I mean that's a challenge to us as designers is to overcome that and make people feel better, feel more comfortable, feel more positive. That's got to be good to help them with coping with this.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree.
Sam Martin also had another question. What projects have most excited you with regards to the use of outdoor space?
You know, I think going forward, definitely hotels. I think that I'm very excited to see how we can plan better with larger scale projects that include the outdoors more. I think that in a lot of cities, you know, things like green roofs haven't been explored nearly enough. You know, for example, we did a hotel in Nashville that it didn't have a green roof, but it was the first roof that was in that city that you could even access, which was crazy to me. So I think that there's a lot of unused space and unused potential with the outdoors in terms of connection there. And I think, you know, my passion is very much in hospitality spaces, in hotels, getting people together, you know, socializing and building community that way. And I think that the more that we can bring outdoor space into that environment is very exciting.
Joan Riggs also asks, how do we get the general public to understand? Oh, that's the same question. Let's put it in twice. Sorry. One last question. Stephanie Elzen. One thing she's struggling with is keeping the open concept look with separation for social distancing. Again, I think that's sort of fairly much what we've covered, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So that was the questions that we had. I think we've done pretty well. We've been nearly three quarters of an hour. So
Awesome.
That's been a good run. And thank you, Danu.
Thanks so much for having me, David. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for tuning in. That was great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Ka kite ano. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.